Thanks for the download. Before we start this episode, it would be great if you could rate the podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, as this helps me know how we're doing and if the content is hitting the mark, and also helps bring it to the attention of potential listeners. If you do like the pod and like to support it, then you can check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, which helps with ongoing costs such as website hosting. My guest today is Ben Skipper, a freelance feature writer and author with books and articles published on art, military and field sports subjects. He is an associate member of the Royal Aeronautical Society and the Pen and Sword Club for military journalists and writers. His interest in British armour was cemented by a visit to the King's Royal Hussars in the early 1990s as an undergraduate in the Territorial Army. He later joined the RAF in 1997 and served in conflict zones including Kosovo and Sierra Leone, and he also played rugby for the RAF. A former Force Protection NCO, Ben suffered increasingly with a range of balance, muscular and co-ordination issues to the extent that doctors thought he might have onset dementia. It was during tests that an MRI scan picked up bright spots of damage in Ben's brain, and it was found that he had experienced a traumatic brain injury during his days in the RAF. Symptoms of his brain injury started to impact on his life, and he became progressively worse after leaving the service in 2002. Ben is also a freelance consultant academic specialising in veteran social culture and has written various papers regarding the symptomatic presentation and effects of combat-related PTSD, not only upon the individual, but also on the family and community. This input has been sought and included in Lord Ashcroft's The Veterans Transition Review in 2014 and the value of participation in University Armed Services units by Newcastle University. Other projects include a visual campaign promoting positive veteran representation and an exhibition of contemporary veteran art. He also finds time to be a county member of the East Midlands Reserve Forces and Cadets Association, who work to support the growth of the reserves and cadet forces in Nottinghamshire. On this podcast, we also discuss his forces background and work with Fallout, which is a new collaborative historical studies enterprise featuring the work of Dr. Philip W. Blood, Dustin Duquesne, all working on the fringe and contemporary thought. Links to Fallout can be found in the show notes. The main focus is on veterans on this one, however, and we cover a variety of issues including public perception, politicisation, charities, the Armed Forces Covenant, and do we need a Veterans Minister, and much, much more. And as usual, we finish off with Desert Island Ditz, which is a guest choice of book, film and luxury item. Let's crack on. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Ben. Can you start by telling us when you joined up, what made you enlist, and why you chose the Royal Air Force?
My experience in the military started in 1993. I joined East Midlands UOTC when I was at the University of Derby. I joined the OTC for a variety of reasons. I'd not had any real exposure to the military in any way, shape or form. Where I lived, we were all young farmers. There was no cadet organisations. So I did that, and when the opportunity OTC came along, I applied, and I was very lucky to get in. I stayed there 2.5 years, at which point I was looking, I was on a 4-year degree course, and my final year I thought, well, don't really want to be doing OTC stuff, I want to be doing something a little bit more interesting within the reserves, well, TA then. And I ended up going to the Royal Signals over at Derby, 4-6 Signal Squadron, where they had NRPS. But this was a HF post-strike radio system. It was a Marconi system in Plessy, and every man in his dog it was a communication system designed by a committee. It was towed by repurposed Rapier tractors. I enjoyed playing radios and stuff, and in the end I applied for. Well, I mentioned the regiment. Dare I shame them? Royal Armoured Corps. And they were a cavalry regiment, and they were quite happy. They said, "We just pass your medical, and we can go from there." And I failed on my eyesight. This was a period, mid-90s, where the army could have anyone. And so they took the best, which is fair enough. So I was at the AFCO in Nottingham, feeling very sorry for myself. And it was the RAF guy walks past. "You're right there." So I've just failed the medical with the army. He said, "Have you? What did you fail on?" "My eyesight." And this sums up the RAF beautifully. He went, You're probably good enough for us. 7 weeks later, I'm at RAF Halton. So I joined the Air Force, did force protection, did air transport security, went all over the place, had a really good time. It got to 5-year point, and for personal reasons I had to leave, which I did. That is my military career.
You wrote a blog on your Fallout Substack recently about veterans, and it really grabbed my attention, and we'll discover why shortly. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about Fallout, who's involved, what it does, and where listeners can find it?
Okay, well, last question first. If you go to Substack, type in Fallout, you'll find us there. Fallout is really the bastard child, I suppose is the best way of putting it, of what was the Adjutant's Lounge, which we still do. The Adjutant's Lounge is a podcast I started doing during lockdown, like every man and his dog did.
As I did.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone had a go. I've covered all sorts. I've looked at the Italian experience of the Desert War through to speak to guys who have looked at the organisation of the British Army in the Edwardian era. And it was there I came across a chap called Dr. Phil Blood. Phil W. Blood. Now, Phil's written quite a few books, as well as essays and blogs. We talked about a little bit, odd bits and pieces around military history, reviewing popularism and providing a counter to this. Within that, we soon came across a wonderful Polish chap called Dustin Duquesne, who is a solicitor. He was a jurist, I think the correct term is. And we started having this it was almost like, because even now, the Adjutant's Lounge isn't scripted. We have an idea and we talk about it. As we get these together, we were actually starting to realise occasionally we're coming up with some really good ideas, really good points. And this is being fed back to us. And this in turn led to the establishment of Fallout, which was to provide counterpoint arguments, counterpoint discussions to popularism. And then, of course, we had Putin decide that he wants to have a go at Ukraine. And this all of a sudden shifted our attentions. And at the time, there were a lot of talking heads. There were a lot of populists saying X, Y, and Z is going to happen. People saying it's going to be like Stalingrad. Well, no, it's been nothing like Fall Blue. That whole thing. It was all about tyres. It was all about this. There was going to be famine. There was going to be starvation. None of that happened. And we called it out from the onset. We're using our skills. Dustin's experience and legal experience, especially around the field of genocide, was pivotal, I think, in how we designed our narrative. And he called it out straight away. Philip did the same. And over a period, we did 2 series of podcasts, The Russian-Ware War, which are slowly actually being uploaded now, and they're being transcribed so you can, understand what I'm saying. Dustin's done whole work on this, by the way. He deserves absolute credit for that. The discussions were... There was a lot of counter-argument, because that's what we'd set out to be. Our sort of subtitle was Tales from the Urban Fringe, and we very much were. So I wrote about, famine. Everyone was saying initially it's going to be famine. Well, no, that didn't happen. Because BRICS put in Canada, America, North America, the Americas in general. They ploughed up their set aside, they got the sunflowers, and they did X, Y, and Z. And then there was a lot of mythologies around Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe. That has its founding, in the early 20th century, and it was untrue then, as it is now. They do produce an awful lot, and I wrote a couple of articles, and these were backed up by data. I knew where to go because I'm a trained agricultural journalist. So I knew exactly where to get the data from, where to pull the data from, and explain why it wasn't going to happen. And I'm not smug about it. I don't feel smug that this shouldn't be happening full stop. Then there were discussions about the use of cruise missiles and the effects they had on the campaign. And a lot of discussions, focused on why the Russians were getting where they were, but more importantly, the effects of the war on the population. None of that was really being discussed. Nobody seemed initially to want to call it out as genocide, which has been recognised. So Phil, in particular, was exceptionally keen on somehow formalising our response. And Putin's War was a book that was released earlier in this year, 2024, gathering up the thoughts of himself, Dustin, Chris Bellamy, and a couple of others. And I do apologise for the names who escaped me, all talking about this. And I recommend the book. Because
Phil gave me a copy, and I can honestly, it's certainly made me reevaluate things.
Yeah, because I think it is one of those books, and it's certainly a subject where you could go along the populist line of who's using what, which is fine. But if you look at it intellectually, it's not an easy read. That's what we do a Fallout.
No, it's great, and I think Putin's War, I think the subtitle is Russia's Genocide, if I recall rightly. Is it Putin War's Russian Genocide? I think it does make you think, and it's a challenging read, but it's divided up into sections written by different authors. So it's easily digestible in that respect. You can it's something you can dip in and out of. And I had to dip in and out of it quite a few times in order to digest the information being put across, because it does make you think quite a bit. So thanks for that, mate. Your blog that I saw is called Disposable Heroes, the Commoditisation, Deification and Misunderstanding of Veterans. And it had me nodding my head in agreement as I read through it. So much so, as I said before, that's why I asked you on the pod to discuss it in greater detail. And you opened with the following statement. I really push my veteran credentials on others. I'm not a, in brackets, professional veteran. And I'm proud not to fall in that ever-diminishing group of individuals who demand fealty at the altar of society as a result of their service because they believe, or have been told, it somehow raises their social status in an already complex and crowded field of contemporary subcultures. Can you just expand on this and why you feel so strongly about it?
Of course. So, if we go back a decade, a little more over a decade now, in 2010, I ended up working within health and social care, and I ended up doing research on veteran subculture. Now, this came about because my boss at the time, we sort of rationalised that the best person to talk about veterans was a veteran. And one of the things that became quite readily apparent, was that we were dealing with an awful lot of charities, which is brilliant. And at this point, I want to make this very clear. There are some excellent charities out there. They really are. There are men and women out there who have, hats off to them, know nothing about veterans. They went out of their way to understand as much as possible and have been non-judgmental and have been ears open. And in some cases, they have almost bankrupted themselves to provide services. These people, though, sadly, are the minority. So, on the flip side of that, one thing that I started to notice an awful lot of were individuals and organisations who were starting to get on the bandwagon, as it were. Bearing in mind, we've been at this point in Afghanistan and Iraq. We pretty much had Iraq. We've been in Afghanistan for a decade. The wounded soldiers were coming back, and airmen and sailors. But all of a sudden, and it was literally out of nowhere, started coming these claims that nearly everyone had PTSD. Okay, that was a bit of a surprise to us because we were working in mental health, and that these people needed help desperately, and that there were ways of doing it. And all of a sudden, you had people offering alternative therapies, which were in some cases very, very dangerous. But then you had, on the fringes of that, people who had a history of starting up, but best way of putting it, jumping on a bandwagon. And they saw this as an opportunity to either make money or make some sort of social currency out of working with veterans. Two of the industries that were actually probably the worst offenders were the construction industry and the security industry at the time. This was also not helped that, as we were talking within a wider group of NGOs, central government providers, local government providers, NHS providers, there was a lack of awareness of what veterans were and what veterans did. And I recall very clearly the head of a well-known veteran-centric organisation saying there was no correlation between poor mental health and homelessness. I remember that distinctly, and I just thought, there is. That is proven. And I found myself thinking, well, if the guys who should know are getting it right, what's going on with the guys who really don't know? And so the investigations go further and further. And you could see all of a sudden these people were just wanting to have that, as I said, this social acme of saying, okay, we're with veterans. I help veterans. Brilliant. But what they were doing, they were taking and working with some very damaged people, and they were singling them out. They were deliberately going for individuals who were vulnerable and their families, and they were getting money for doing it, and they were getting quite good money. And so what was then happening was that the services that they were offering and what were actually being delivered weren't matching up, which in a couple of instances, certainly within my area, geographically, led to very sad incidences of veterans killing themselves because what they had been promised wasn't delivered. The safeguarding issues were through the roof. And this went on, and again, there was no way that this could have been foreseen by wider organisations because you took people on. They weren't, because a lot of these people were exceptionally good at selling what they were doing. I don't know whether it's a veteran thing, but when it comes to Sydney saying they can do X, Y, and Z, our little light bulbs, so, you know, that little switch, yeah, really? Can you? Yeah, okay. No, you can't. And this was highlighted for me when dealing with a construction firm. The construction firm has now gone bust, so I don't know whether that was karma catching up with them. But they wanted to talk about working with veterans and how the best way to work with veterans was. And I said, well, you know, ideally you need somebody who is a veteran. You need to ask about their experience, and you need to see if that is appropriate to your organisation. And then you need to make the offer very clear to the veteran, because what you're doing is you're dealing with people whose, by and large, their idea of hierarchy is very rigid, and what they are told, by and large, not because they're conditioned, we are not conditioned. We are the same as any other group, but we have several little things that perhaps stick us, you know, lead us out a little bit to the edge, is that when we're told something, we tend to do it because that's quite important.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes from training commands. And your supervisor in Civvy Street is part of your chain of command. So if they tell you to do something, you do it. If your senior manager says they're going to do it, you expect them to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and you're in an alien environment straight away. You're not used to this environment. And some people seem to take advantage of that. And they took advantage of the commercial naivety of veterans. And I'll talk about that in a minute or two. And so it literally was a case, these organisations, and this particular organisation, was seeing it as a tick box exercise because they'd seen a competitor doing exactly the same thing. And this is 2017 when this actually happened, and they wanted to get in on that because they could get money from the LIBOR fund. And they're saying this to me, and I was like, no, or whatever, it's, you know, it's LIBOR 2, I think, at that point. I've got my days wrong, I do apologise. But it was about money at the end of the day. And then they asked me a question. It was a couple of meetings, and they said to me, oh, do you think veterans would work for free for job experience? And I can recall, just look at this, the individual who asked this question, I said, was you.
Yeah.
With all your experience, if you wanted to go to a new industry and you turned up at my door and you said, would you offer me free work experience? I said, yeah, of course I would. But if you did so thinking that, or believing that there was a job at the end of it, would you still knock on my door? Well, no, because you're savvy to that might happen, so you probably won't do it. But for a lot of veterans, hearing the word might translated to will.
Yeah.
And they were getting free labour for 4 weeks. You know, and they were deliberately, they knew who they wanted, which was good. They had a sift. They were looking for a lot of RE guys. Few RE lads. They didn't want people from the Air Force. Well, to be fair, the techies in the Air Force, they were being picked up by Boeing, Lockheed, General Dynamics, all these other they didn't have to worry about seeking this sort of support, and the same with the Navy guys. But they were deliberately focusing on the Toms who were coming out, probably 3 to 5 years service. And part of me felt really uncomfortable with that. And I said to them, well, why don't you just give them a short-term contract, even if it's just to get them established within the business, know the ins and outs of how it works, use the opportunity to mentor people. Now, this is before the employer recognition scheme was fully in place. No, we don't really want to do that. We just want to just see what they're like, and we'll give them a trial 4 weeks, and then we don't like them. And that was when the truth came out. I said, well, so basically you're using them for free labour.
Yeah.
No, you don't do that. Then there are other areas. And in my paper, the one that I picked up on, and I'd really sort of not flicked my trigger, but really brought into sort of contrast, was the political commoditisation of veterans. So the example that I gave was of the former Home Secretary who pitched up at a veterans event down in her constituency, surrounded herself with veterans, that's with new service veterans, to announce this 5-point plan. Now, this 5-point plan was what Sunak was gassing on about, which today I don't think anyone can really remember what it was. But all of a sudden, you had a Home Secretary who had been absolutely stoking the fires of discord, shattering communities and everything else, wanting to use veterans as literally as a backdrop to this great announcement, as if the presence of a veteran somehow gave her words agency. They our presence in her moment meant that she wasn't lying. It was an exceptionally bad call by the charity who allowed this to happen. It was grotesque. They allowed veterans to be used as political playthings, for want of a better word. I understand it if we're talking to an MP who's a veteran, I understand it if we're talking to an MP who's working with the Ministry of Defence. I get that. But at the time, we were dealing with a Home Secretary whose anti-immigration and anti-immigrant rhetoric was off the scale, conveniently forgetting that within the British, military, we have Gurkhas, we have Fijians.
Foreign Commonwealth, lots of soldiers from those countries.
Yeah, and I just could not get my head around it. And then we had Sunak try the very same thing just before the election. And I thought, no, you can't keep doing this. Because let's go back in time. That government were treated members of our community appallingly. I'm going to ask people just to think back. I've written the name down so I get it right. A chap called David Clapson. David Clapson had type 1 diabetes. In 2013, his body was found in his flat, and he'd starved to death. A combination of starvation, but he had severe diabetes, but he didn't have the money to keep his insulin cold. Now, the reason being is he'd been sanctioned by the DWP for not showing up to an interview. They took his money away. He was also a veteran of the Royal Signals. So when I hear politicians in particular saying that veterans are the best of us, veterans are what we should all be about, it jars me a little, because we're clearly not.
These charities spring up because of the perceived or actual lack of care given by governments to veterans. That's what I think a lot of the time as well.
You're right, and that's in itself is worth noting. So, and they're the good ones, the people who notice that there is a need, and it's often geographical, isolated communities. There are some really good guys and girls out there performing absolutely stunning work. I think at one point in 2012, we had something like 3,500 veterans charities. And that was just too much. Now, this was noted governmentally and gave rise to the Veterans Transition Review. Part of, there was a lot of talk about veterans not being dealt with as well as we should have been. But I don't know what for example, your leaving journey has been. Mine was pretty I had my time. My TA service counted towards my resettlement. I did quite well. I was very lucky. I know some people didn't get any at all because of operational reasons, because of lack of planning, because they couldn't get away, because there was nothing going on at the time. Then there were lots of reasons. But at that point, this was becoming a major theme. And so the veterans, one of the reasons the veteran transition was one of the things that they were looking at doing was trying to catch everyone and provide a safety net. And that also included firming up and formalising. And this was the hope at the time of having a legal framework in place to prevent fly-by-nights suddenly getting wounded ESCAN heroes with dodgy headwear support, ink, getting them out of the picture and getting the focus on ex-services mental health society known as combat stress or Royal British Legion. It was also a great opportunity, and I was involved with this with a great many other people, to formalise the overall offer of veterans and give us something that would make us as veterans feel proud for serving. And that's probably the easiest way of putting it. And there were lots of discussions, and I think it was a missed opportunity. Well, I know it was. Lord Ashcroft, who led it, could have done more. I won't lie. The lords and ladies who lead these sort of working parties, some are very, very good. Some are phenomenal. Lord Ashcroft could have been. But for some reason, he's always elsewhere, which is odd because he's always been very pro-military.
You were involved in this, weren't you? Was this the Veterans Transition Review?
Yeah, I was. I was asked because somebody had read my paper, one of my papers, and they said, on transition, and said, would you like to be involved? Well, okay, that's very kind of you to ask. And yeah, I wasn't sure what I was bringing to the proverbial party, but it soon became clear that everyone involved pretty much wanted the offer of the time to be better than it was. We wanted legal definitions rather than what we have. We wanted protections for family and carers. That was a key thing. We wanted protection within the criminal justice system. We wanted the protection within the homeless rate. It was in that sense. There was a lot of myopia going on, and I fell victim to that as well. You become centred on the group. But at the time, we had 6.2 million veterans, which was huge. Certainly when I left, there were still Second World War veterans about, and rightly they were feted, and they should have been. You had a lot of the national service guys and girls, they were starting to retire, but they were still quite big on the scene. So, the actual physical perception of the veteran was still quite old. I mean, I didn't see myself as a veteran, to be fair. I was quite young. And that was the other thing. We wanted to change how veterans are viewed physically. And that's something I don't think we were ever going to really sort out in a hurry, because the way that we are portrayed in popular culture, in the press, and even by charities themselves.
Well, it seems to me that public view is either you're either a hero or you're damaged goods, whether that's physical or mental health. That's how my perception of how the public perceives veterans.
And you are 100% right. We are. And that's an Americanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I find ironic, because the Americans wouldn't touch their veterans, especially the Vietnam veterans, with a barge pole. And veteran funding in America, and this is relevant, and that's why I mentioned it, during the 80s was... do you recall Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Lieutenant Danton, he's in that horrible dive, isn't he? That horrible... that was veteran care in America in the 80s. It was bordering on criminal.
You only have to look at Born on the 4th of July. I read Born on the 4th of July many years after I watched the film. I thought those conditions can't be that bad. Then I went and read other sources, and they were. And not only that, Ron Kovic was in that hospital, with World War I veterans. Some of them had come to that hospital, the Veterans Hospital, just after World War I and never left. And the conditions in there were absolutely dire.
Yeah, it was an absolute shame in America. This is a country that today, our veterans are America. Always the Ron Burgundy-esque, isn't it? But the reality, and you're absolutely spot on, the reality was completely different. And it took me, it wasn't until 2012, and I don't know what caused it. I think it was quite possibly shame, and I hope it was, that the Americans suddenly started investing a lot of money. And the reason I mentioned it was about this time that all of a sudden we thought we should be doing the same thing. Help Heroes was slowly... that was a runaway train. I really don't think the Paris thought that would be as popular. Well, come on, it was supported by the Sun. It was going to be popular.
but it captured a zeitgeist almost, didn't it, I think? And as much as Kipling's Tommy is as cliche because it's used so much, it's no less true or powerful for her. And I think as well, going back to what you're saying about charities like Help for Heroes gathering momentum and capturing the public imagination, where do you hear about veterans now, or care for veterans, or whatever? It's just fallen from public imagination.
It has, and there are so many reasons for that. Primarily, thankfully, we're not at war. Afghanistan was, who was it? I think it might have actually been Kipling said Afghanistan was the empire killer. We were there for 20 years and people tend to forget, and I think we've still got a small presence there. The same with Iraq. We're still involved there with Shader. The veteran in the common consciousness has gone back to this benevolent, old, curious, reliable, stalwart yeoman figure. No, that's not me. And there was a wonderful photograph, Patrick Saunders. Have you seen it when he was at Glastonbury?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was a wonderful... Yeah, with his son. He looked like he was from a rock band, didn't he?
That's what a veteran is to me. A veteran literally is... He's there with his family. When my father left, if I did his the TA, the first thing he did, my mother and him, they went to Amsterdam to a brown cafe.
All right, okay. It's to unwind.
He wanted to see what all the fuss had been about. We often have these jokes. You talk with lads, the first thing I'll do is I'm going to smoke a big spliff and I'll get out the gates in front of the SSM or stay slow and they won't be able to do a thing about it. Okay, 3 months rule aside, yeah, I get the gist. I get where where you're getting with that. But again, the veteran, the face of the common veteran, really, it isn't grey slacks, blazer, and beret. Because of what I do with the RFCA, I go out, throw a tie on, give my medals polish, and try and look reasonably smart. And that doesn't define me. Randomly, as I've got older, I see myself less as a veteran.
That image of the veterans marching at the cenotaph, that's what the public expect. The other image they expect is the soldiers suffering from PTSD. And the sad fact is that there are lots and lots of soldiers who suffer from PTSD and commit suicide. And especially if you can go to the States, their suicide rates are absolutely horrendous amongst their veterans. For the veteran community to thrive, and for the veteran community to be not appreciated, but better looked after as time goes by, how are we going to do that? And the second part of that is, you and I had a discussion on Twitter about a veterans minister. And you persuaded me why a veterans minister wasn't needed. So I'd be interested in just those two aspects, that question there, of what you think.
Veterans minister, I'll comment a bit because I can sort of see this one coming. I think in terms of how do we care for veterans, going back to the cenotaph, and that's a really good point. The cenotaph that we do every year, that has become almost a weather gauge of veteran perception. Now, if people look at history, when the cenotaph was unveiled, when the unknown soldiers returned, the parade was nowhere near as formal as it was. We had the king, heads of state, lay their wreaths at the temporary cenotaph. What then followed was truly unique, and we should have so kept this. It was veterans, and it was the families of the fallen were then allowed to walk behind the cortege, because the unknown warrior got a field marshal's cortege. That elevation was not a recognition of sacrifice, and so everyone following that thought it was their son, their husband, their brother, their lover. They all had a connection. I won't go into what happened next because it is exceptionally emotional. But somehow we went from that to, I watched last year's. I love watching it because it's great. You get bigger and bigger queues. But one of the things I noticed was that the amount of veterans, the number of veterans parading are lessening. We're now including social groups, which is brilliant. We're getting the cadets, we're getting the sea cadets in. So we're at this point where, because there are fewer veterans, do we just wheel them out? Do we just wheel this out for parades? How do we actually show we care? We missed a World Cup of opportunities to prove we care because the Armed Forces Covenant was not enshrined in law, and which I find remarkable because...
you know why though, Ben? It's because it gives them a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. That, and it's not cynical to say that, it's the truth.
Yeah.
We are literally wheeled out for special occasions, aren't we? We get in November we get the Armistice Remembrance. Occasionally we'll get something on the television. Again, always with the older veterans. But I'll counter that. RAF at the moment are doing a great project with Iraq and Afghan veterans in terms of mental health, and they're using contemporary veterans. That's what it's about. That's how we do it. How do we show we care? We get people just as you and I are. You can't see, we're audio only, but I'm in my knackered old motorcycle t-shirt, you're in your jumper. That's who we are. We're the same as you, but we have our life and our lived experience is slightly different. And that makes us a little bit unique. And no one is asking for preferential treatment, but what we are asking for is that because, and I don't think it's unfair to ask for a little bit of protection, because we have asked, a lot has been asked for us, and men and women far greater and far better than I have given their all.
That, in essence, is what the military covenant is, though, isn't it? When you boil it down, it's you volunteered to serve in the forces, and the country will look after you if you are damaged in any way, shape, or form from that service. So we're not asking for it to be put in front of the council housing list or anything like that. What we're saying is, if you've lost both your legs, you'll get speedy treatment, and you'll be looked after. You maybe get a bit of help sorting your house out to make it accessible. That to me is what the covenant is about, and that is where it fails. I don't know what you think.
No, you're right. And you've raised a very good point, and it's the expectation. When I talked about the professional veteran. So when I was at Audley Court, I don't know if any of you heard, guys, used to do inpatient. So I was surrounded by guys from the Welsh Guards, younger lads, from the Balkan.
Is Audley Court different from Headley Court?
It is, yeah. So Audley Court was the combat stress inpatient place over at Shropshire.
Right, I didn't know that, so I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Again, this was personal experience. There were people there who were very much kept themselves under the radar, but then you had the professional veteran, a bleak professional victim. They wanted everything. And it was noticed amongst people who'd been going there a lot longer than I. You soon picked up on it. They were the ones who wanted the free tickets. They were the ones who wanted the free car. They were the ones who wanted the housing. Why? Why are they any different? Why are they any different to somebody who has got severe cancer who needs that support, who isn't a veteran? You'll probably get lots of emails about that remark, and there's going to be further compounded in a minute when I talk about the Minister for Veterans. But it was this sense of entitlement I found. Whether it's my moral compass, I don't know, but I found that sense of entitlement really uncomfortable to be around. We knew what we were getting into. Most of us did. We accepted the help was there, as you rightly said, and we looked for that support. I didn't want a free house. I didn't want a free car. I just wanted to be able to go out, socialise, and be with my daughter. That there were many ways that would have helped, especially within the rider employment circle. I saw that many OTs who really didn't understand the whole veteran thing. They just did not get it. Yes, I lost jobs because of the stress of it, because I couldn't go, because X, Y, and Z at the time. It would have been great to have somebody in the DWP say, okay, not a problem. Have you thought of this? We can do this. And ironically, it wasn't until probably 10 years ago that I had cause to go to the DWP for something completely disconnected. And they introduced me to the disabled point of contact. And I said to them, just out of interest, have you got a veterans representative? No. Because, and she was very honest. She said, what would they bring that I can't do for you? I have the connections within the veterans community. And she did. She did her job. So going back to those changes, all I really needed, rather than floundering, and I did, and a lot of us did at that period, was just to have the point of calls. Everything not laid out, but easy to find. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years later that these started to come together. It was always the push around 2010 for organisations to pull the proverbial lead out. There was the foundation of caring. We had the Armed Forces Covenant would have really helped. As you said, they're never going to legalise that because it would show that they failed. You would open the proverbial floodgates for a lot of people to have a go and try and get something from the system financially or otherwise. But the other thing is that we still put veterans on a pedestal. This is the big sticky point. We are the same as everybody else. The veterans, we have our heroes, we have our villains. We have some really, really unpleasant villains in the veteran community. People don't seem to appreciate that. We have people who believe that because they're a veteran, they somehow have they are socially elevated above their peers. They are socially elevated above their neighbours. You have some people who are slightly ashamed of their veterans.
See, there's a difference there to what you're saying to me. So, from my perspective, the veterans can fall into two categories. You have the veteran who's been wounded in service and has not been looked after. He's given a crappy prosthetic limb and told just to go on with it. He doesn't get his physio and he's not looked after. That's totally disgraceful. In my eyes, he should be getting good treatment, priority treatment, and the best of what the NHS can give. To me, that's part of the covenant. On the other hand, you've got the guy who's done his service, could be 5 years, 15, 20, hasn't planned for anything. He's not been injured during his service, and he gets out and he expects the world to march to his tune and hand him everything on a plate. So I think for me, the distinction between those two is quite big, if you see what I mean.
No, you're right. And I'm of the German mind when it comes to charity. We shouldn't have charities. We should be cared for the state. If you're wounded, you should get cared by the state. There is no discussion about this. There is no, oh well. No, let's drop this hand-wringing, pearl-clutching faux sympathy approach to wounded veterans. So no, if we are good enough to be trained, and everything's about money nowadays, isn't it? You're invested in money, then you have the duty of care. Another great one is to ensure that when we are vulnerable, we have a safety net. I'm not, like you very rightly said, we are not looking for the Ferrari Testarossa, the safety nets. We're looking more like, the Astra Belmont SRI, because the injuries a lot of people will experience if they are injured are more severe than you would get in most cases. And so in terms of care, it should be government-led. We really, charities, the RBL should be there to provide somewhere for us to go and have a pie and a pint for a little bit under inflationary prices, and to meet up and be bored to tears by somebody's fishing adventures the other day. Any adaptations should, as you rightly said, come from government. It's not, and they can't say it's not, it's unaffordable. The numbers of us are dwindling. Just under 1.85 million veterans today. I don't know what the amount of people getting war pensions are. I mean, I'm one of them. I'm not worth that much. I'm very lucky. I don't need many adoptions. So there is no excuse for the government not to step up, for any government. And rather than using us, reeling us out every so often to reinforce a point or say we are socially better, we're twice as citizen, they should actually put the money where their mouth and say, no, we're going to prove you are. We'll make sure you and your family and your carers are absolutely fine.
That dwindling number of veterans, which is only ever going to get smaller because it's a smaller army, is one of the reasons that you think, and you proposed an argument for that I agreed with, much to my horror, when you said we don't need a veterans minister. Can you just explain your reasoning behind that?
Alistair Cairns is the new Undersecretary for Veterans and People. That makes sense. So, because we've already got a Secretary of State, we already have, ministers within the MOD. We are not a separate entity, nor should we be, nor should veterans be a separate department within the mechanism of government. And I'll tell you, and there's a practical reason. Things won't get done if that happens. There'll be no joined-up thinking. Where we are at the moment is very good. The other thing is cost. Is it worthwhile giving somebody a seat at the cabinet to represent just under 2 million people? Or do we use our common sense and have a cabinet minister, I think it's Angela Rayner's post, who deals with poverty, of which the most vulnerable veterans will fall into that group? Well, of course it is. Every social ill that we are experiencing as veterans is already covered by another cabinet minister. So just to have one is a vanity. And I know this is going to really probably get a few people rather upset. I don't apologise for that. Let's be honest. Let's be absolutely honest with ourselves. We don't need that level of representation, because at cabinet, what happens it's all important. Where the representation is important is in the social representation. And we are absolutely inundated with good, bad and indifferent social representation. We've got that. We certainly don't need a cabinet minister. We have ministers who, we've got the Secretary, the Minister for Health. Don't know who that is at the moment. I'll remember when I'm finished. They're covering our well-being. They're covering the mental health aspects. They're trying to get it back together after 14 years of non-investment. They're doing their best for our families, the housing, Lisa Mundy and everyone else. They're all doing their best to re-establish the covenant between government and British people.
I think that is where your argument would be strongest. And I don't disagree with it, as I already said, but I really think possibly where the argument could fall down is by the lack of application of the military covenant. Because if each of these departments was signed up to the military covenant, where veterans who deserve it and qualify, if you like, get what the treatment and help that they need, then there would be definitely no need for a veterans minister. I'm not explaining myself very well, but I just feel if that military covenant was enshrined in law and each department was signed up to it, it would give veterans the help that they very badly need at times.
You're right. We do need it enshrined in law, and as I said earlier, we missed a golden opportunity. we had it on a plate, and everyone said, and I can remember, it was quite funny, really, looking back on it. People were literally slamming tables, we need it, look. And I thought, hey, calm down, Mavis. But no, these individuals were on the ball. And again, if you look at even if you look at a contemporary situation I've faced recently around the employer recognition scheme, this is a classic. An organisation has signed up, they're gold award winners, signed up to the ERS, got the gold award. They promise, part of that is a veteran who meets the criteria, the minimum criteria for that job will get an interview. They're not going to get the job, but they're going to get the interview, which is a brilliant, brilliant thing, because if you're just out after 25, 30 years, 5 years, 12, that experience is invaluable. The organisation concerned, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to engage with the veterans' concerns. Now, if we had the ERS, for example, as part of the law, where if you say that, the HR's going to get a phone call from somebody at MOD Maine, going to get, right, we notice you are the X, Y, and Z. Why aren't you doing it? I think there'd be a lot of changes straight away. And that's just a simple example of how the covenant can be enacted in law. The same with care. You made the comments about piss poor, and I'm sorry for the language, prosthetics. I've certainly seen some very poor examples. You have to have a minimum standard. Somebody comes away and they've lost a limb, and they come away with something that is substandard. There should be a recourse to that individual, because at the end of the day, it's going to cost whoever twice to make right. Do it right the first time around. And if we have to have that legal safety net, then I think we should have that in place. If somebody is facing homelessness, now, poverty in this country is a big problem. Everyone who's got anything about them will recognise that. The veterans are no different. But if they're facing homelessness because of what occurred to them as a veteran, not because they couldn't be asked, as you rightly said, to get their act together when they left, and suddenly they're out in the barracks with a family in 14 moth boxes thinking, what do we do? If the proverbial rug's been pulled from under their feet, they need that protection. They need the local council or whoever to step up. The only way they'll do that is if it's enshrined by law. We've got a veteran, he's going to be homeless, what can you do to help? Right, we'll do X, Y, and Z. It's part of our social contract that these people have signed on the line. Let's get them help. And it'd be interesting, if Al Cairns, he's probably highly likely to listen, but if he is, this is what needs to be happening. And this isn't the old tub thumping going in, slamming on desks. This is just common sense. If you want to talk a good post-service offer, then deliver a good post-service offer. But going back, I don't think that is best served by having a dedicated cabinet member, because there's too much crossing over. That's where you get complications. Empire building is not going to solve some of the problems people have got. We just want somebody who is on the ball, who is not self-serving, who is aware of what's going on, who has the integrity to do the right thing. And that's what we need now more than ever. And that would serve us far better than having a cabinet minister who is drawing a lot of money and doing very little.
Yeah, and actually has very little influence as well, which you have noticed over the last couple of years. Which is another reason I'm not necessarily a bigger fan of a veterans minister, because I don't actually think either that seat at the table, I don't actually think they have much sway. So I think for me, the military covenant is key. And going back to some of the points you made about people going for job interviews, a lot of the stuff, the way the Americans treat veterans makes me uneasy. The whole coming on the planes first and getting cheered at football matches. That's not just. It might be just my buttoned-up Scottishness. I just don't like that. But where I think they do get it right, for example, is if they're applying for a police department, they get extra points. They get a guaranteed interview. Their service is recognised where it should be recognised. It's not just a handout. It's just a bit of assistance in making that transition to become another useful member of society.
And that is absolutely spot on. That's what should be happening. We'll go on about the veneration in a minute. But when it comes to veterans leaving, if you look back in time, it was the Guards Division. They almost had an unwritten rule with so many police forces around the world that you went to the Guards, you left the Guards, you became a copper. They were taller than most civvies. If you were a 5.5 street urchin, you got 6.6 of copper with his hat bearing over. You're going to listen. Lord is a classic example of that.
RSM Lord, yeah, legend.
Absolute. This is and again, paras. They have their basics, whether they like it or not. In the Guards Division, Browning, all the rest of them, they made them what they are. That's a discussion perhaps of somebody far better than me.
Yeah, you're often the front cases there.
The point that I'm making. I'm about to say, I'm going to get filled in round the back of Tesco one. There is nothing wrong with doing that. And I think in that case, the Americans got it right because, they're recognising service as, or I think it's in the term social credit, probably not in the main term that it's used elsewhere, but they're recognising that you've gone out of your way. We were one of the first people to do the mass demobs. We started almost instantaneously. Go back into society. Because we're not a military, as a society, we're not particularly wary, for want of a better word, even though we've got a good history of having battles. The Americans, because their nation was built on bloodshed, as every revolutionary nation is, they automatically held their fighting men and women in slightly higher regard. Now, that's purely a cultural thing. That's an historical thing unique to the Americans. It doesn't translate well when you look at it in terms of the British psyche, which is quite muted, quite humble, by and large. There are always exceptions to the rule. And I can imagine most people, when somebody said thank you for the service, they'll say nothing, you'll go very meekly.
To your point about how, America was born, I also think they had an awful lot to make up from Vietnam, and they went from left of scale, how they treat Vietnam veterans, to the right of the scale, where they are today. That's quite rightly, as we already discussed, those Vietnam veterans were treated terribly. But I just think us adopting that veneration, it just makes me uncomfortable, because if you put somebody in a pedestal, there's only one way to go after that, and that's down.
Yeah, and you're right, and we shouldn't be doing it. That if you look at how when people are elevated, they do one of three things: they accept it, they say, "Tone it down, lads," or they'll go, "Give me more." Sadly, with some veterans, they just want more. But when you take them out of the military environment and put them in civilian environment, they've got a wider audience, and all of a sudden, they try and use their military service as some sort of social currency. We are, again, that cross-section of society, but we certainly shouldn't be put on a pedestal. As you rightly say, it's a really dangerous place to be. It's feet to clay territory.
The thing that's developed over the last few years and really gets my goat is poppy shaming. I remember in Queen/King's regulations it would be now, there's a specific time, I can't remember when it is, something like 10 days or something, or 7 days before Armistice Day that you put poppy on. It used to
be the 1st of November, it used to be
Was that, something like that, wasn't it?
Reading in part 1, it was 1st of November.
And then you get poppy shaming done on the TV, newsreaders, why aren't they got the poppy on in May? But to me, that is that veneration gone wrong again, because it's an individual choice. That's what we fought wars for people to have choices and not be shamed into any actions.
Again, you're 100% on the nail. Yeah, well, why? And you see the size. I mean, in Parliament, it was getting to the point of being obscene. Dinner plate-sized poppies knitted by nanas. Oh, come on, please. You're a grown individual. It's very simple. You could get a simpler symbol of remembrance if you tried. It would be beautifully done. And if you don't want to wear one, if somebody doesn't want it, I'm not going to lose an ounce of sleep. I'm not going to lose an ounce of weight about it. If you decide you don't want to wear a poppy, good for you. Because you know what? That's what my grandfather fought for, my great-grandfather fought for you to have that right.
We'll finish on a high note then, because some of that conversation was a bit dispiriting. So, Desert Island Debts, which is the guest choice of it. I'm not saying Desert Island Debts won't be Ben. So, what is your choice of book, film, and luxury item if you were stranded on a desert island on your Todd?
Now, you know what? This was a really good one, mate. It was a bit of a size one because around this. So, book choice. It's going to be really, really weird. H.E. Bates, Darling Buds of May.
Why did you pick that one?
I'm from a rural background, and I recognise parts of that. When I grew up in the 80s, Nottinghamshire really hadn't progressed that far from the 50s. So there were things going on within that I could recognise. And Thomas Hardy is quite, it was between that and Thomas Hardy and the Woodlanders, but Thomas Hardy's quite a dour writer. There are so many books that I would choose. Do you go for Guy Sayer? Well, if I read that, The Forgotten Soldier after a week, I'd probably
slit your wrists.
Probably go wrong swim. So, yeah. So I don't think I'll be reading it, but it has a comfort to it that perhaps is only matched by The Hobbit in some respects for me personally. It's calm, but it's of its time. It's not risque. by any stretch of the imagination. It really isn't. But it's a world, and I'm not one to give it to nostalgia. I'm really not. But I think I read it with David Jason in mind.
I'm intrigued now even more. You caught me on the hop with your book choice. So what's your film choice?
So film choice, this was going to be, again, this is an awkward one. It has to be, what I can watch again, The Mission.
Oh, De Niro.
Yeah, De Niro and Jeremy Irons. I have so many favourite films, this man, but it's one of those films that I could watch time and time again. You could take it on face value, or you can read it. It's one that you can read it, you watch it, and you always find something new in it. And it's one of the few De Niro roles, for me, that he absolutely, knock out of the ballpark. He just takes it to another bloody planet. Absolutely hoofs it. And, of course, it was Liam Neeson's breakthrough role as well, breakthrough film.
Well, it's years since I've seen that.
It's easier to watch than Taken.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's
But she's always going to be remembered for.
Exactly. He's so typecast now, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's one of those films that makes you think. And
luxury item.
Yeah, one thing I couldn't live without is my coffee. So I would need a cafetiere. That is the break. The other two items I could live without, but if I don't have a cafetiere and some coffee, I'm not a happy camper.
Do you know what? I've said this to quite a few guests now. The amount of British guests on this podcast that have picked coffee, we've built an empire on tea and we're just coffee drink. I reckon that's why we're doing so badly in the world. You can screw off Brexit and everyone else. It's because we all drink coffee now. So my book is called Similar to Stanley by Roger Field, and I hope to get Roger on the podcast if I'm writing to his publisher as we speak. Similar to Stanley is about the Blues and Royals in the Falklands. I picked up this book by a cavalry officer thinking, with a bit of trepidation, it is quite irreverent, it is quite scathing about Brigadier Tony Wilson in the Falklands, who he died the other year there. And one thing that took me by surprise was the obituaries and sort of things that have been written him post-death were very, very hard on him. And when you read Similar to Stanley, you get a better understanding of why that is. Roger Field writes that basically the Brigadier didn't want to know anything about the capabilities of Scimitar or Scorpion. They weren't utilised properly down south. But when they were very, very effective. So Field went down there basically as a watchkeeper in the brigade staff. He spent ages banging his head trying to promote what his troop and its vehicles could do to no avail with 5 brigade staff. And then he was on the Falklands and he went up to 2 paras, I think it was the adjutant or one of the company commanders, and they took him to the CO of 2 para. And it's quite funny the way he writes, because CO 2 para says to him, I think you should join my TAC for the attack on Wireless Ridge. And Roger Field writes quite funny, it was an offer he desperately wanted to take, but wasn't sure why he took it. So he ended up tabbing with the paras to fight at Wireless Ridge. And he was directing his vehicles' guns onto Argentinian positions. And during the battle, one of these scimitars went down a shell hole and knocked out the commander. He got a bit of hatch rash on the top of his head. So when this was found out, he then had to make his way back about a kilometre from where the CO's TAC was, back to the regimental aid post, through basically, no man's land at a time to get and meet up with his crew. And then he jumped on board that scimitar and directed the gunfire on that scimitar for the rest of the war. It's a really, really good read. One of the best books in the Falklands I've read, actually. So, as I say, I'm in the process of writing to Pen and Sword at the minute, see if I can get Roger's details to get him on the podcast.
So, then, so you give me a book, what's your film?
See, now you've caught me out. I'll only ever do a book. Oh, my God. No, I tell you, I know exactly what film.
No, you see this.
I would take Tunes of Glory, because the Alec Guinness, John Mills film, because we've just been talking about PTSD, and that was more or less about PTSD. It was about weak leadership. It was about toxic leadership, and even more so because my dad passed away 10 years ago, but I remember my dad on a cold, wet Scottish afternoon. I was going to go out and play with my mates. I was about 12, and he said, "You're going nowhere. Come in, sit down and watch this with me." And on a Saturday afternoon, we sat down and watched Tunes of Glory, and I've loved that film ever since. It's made even better for me because of the memories I've got of my dad grabbing me and saying, "You're going nowhere, watch this film."
Now that's fatherhood.
Yeah, just loved it. Just loved it.
Yeah,
So Ben, look, sorry,
it's a lovely memory.
Yeah,
It's a lovely memory to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a lot. It's always watching at least a couple of times a year. So Ben, look, thank you for coming on the podcast. Much appreciated. And I encourage everybody to have a look at Fallout.
And all I was going to say, I'm going to absolute shameless plug, although we've sort of talked about some of the negatives of veterans. What I did do in 2015, 26, for about 3 years, I did a veteran positive representation project called I.
Right.
And it features 100 veterans all across the board. We got Robert Lawrence, MC, in there.
All right,
He agreed to do it with me. Dame, oh good God, I forgot her name. Athlete, PCI, Kelly Holmes.
Kelly Holmes.
Yeah, Kelly Holmes. She agreed to be involved. Caroline Page agreed to be involved. Plus, we've got mother-daughter veterans. We've got married couples. We've even got some Royal Engineers in there, I think. We might even have a gunner.
No.
Yeah, and this was it was all about self-representation, and it was like a counter-argument to what was going on at the time about the negative representation of veterans, and I really wanted to do something with a positive representation. In the end, I self-funded it because nobody was interested in giving me money, which was fine actually, and I felt better for that. And it's on a website, and if I'm really cheeky, I'll give you the link. But that's it. I'm not going to shamelessly plug that any longer now.
No, definitely. What I'll do is I'll put out the links for Fallout, and if you email me the links for that other website you're talking about, I'll get them put in the podcast notes. So, thanks again also to the listener. No problem, mate. Also, thanks again to our listeners for continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you download us from iTunes, you like the podcast, it would be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcast from. And thanks again to Nick Beale for his continued help in offering technical support for his company ISAR. And we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.